Hi there, welcome to the video and welcome back if you're a return viewer. You're watching the Crash at Your Groove books and I'm Kerry. Today, a quite old book, a science fiction classic, well known to those in the fandom of science fiction, but it was new to me. I'd been meaning to read it for ages. So a bit of background. The author of this book is Alfred. He was a big name in the pulp science fiction magazines in the 30s and 40s, then he disappeared for a while, then he came back in the 50s with some novels which are very well known still to this day, and probably the most well-known one is this one, The Star's My Destination. Now this is an ebook of the Sci-Fi Masterworks edition, which has a lovely cover there by I think it's Chris Moore, showing the main character in all his glory. This book came out in 1956, and many aspects of it read very contemporary, like something from the 80s or 90s or even present day. It's just surprising how fresh it seems, or how up to our current attitudes it seems. But at the same time, there are some very 1950s or even earlier attitudes in there too, which kind of stick out to the contemporary reader. So let me tell you what it's about. It's the story of a gentleman, that's him on the cover, called Gully Foyle, or in the book he's mainly known as Gully Foyle. And as we open the story, he is on a derelict spaceship in the middle of nowhere in space. His ship is called the Nomad. It was attacked and damaged, and he's been living like in a cocoon in the ship for months, I think 6 months, before he does a big MacGyver act and gets himself out of there. Now, earlier in the book, I should have mentioned, there's a very entertaining introduction about the concept of jaunting. Now, in this 23rd or 24th century that this book is set at, jaunting has become the main driver of society, perhaps. It's a kind of ability to personally teleport yourself to somewhere that you can picture, and it's changed society. A lot of transport systems have failed and what have you, because people just want to jaunt everywhere. If you can picture a designated jaunting platform in New York or something, you can go there. But people have to train themselves to do it, and some people can't go a certain distance. And the main thing which seems to be frustrating the people is that you cannot jaunt into space or across space. So this becomes an important point later. Anyway, the introduction, introducing the concept of jaunting is very amusing, describing experiments and the forced experiments which people basically had to jaunt or die. So it's theorized that it's an inherent is the word I'm thinking of, capability to all humans, and it just comes out in times of pressure. And so the experiments are quite brutal and also quite hilarious to read. Anyway, back to the main story. So Gully Foyle MacGyvers his way out of his predicament and ends up in the asteroid belt, where he encounters a kind of kooky religious cult, bunch of people who have kind of devolved from modern society and exist in this kind of hashed together environments of old spaceships and habitation modules which kind of lashed together on an asteroid. They take him in, and basically he is chosen to be a husband of one of the women in this cult, and as part of that he receives a facial tattoo. Now this becomes another major point in the book. It's described as like a tiger at some point, but in other areas that they mention it to be like a Maori moko facial tattoo. Oddly enough, in this book, it's seen as a shameful type of thing to have, a shocking antisocial thing which Gully Foyle has to kind of live with after that until another point in the book, which I'll come to. Now, Gully makes his way back to Earth. He has several adventures, and the important thing which I forgot to mention, stupid me, is that when he was stranded in space, he was another ship approached called the Vorga, and he sent out emergency signals, and the Vorga ignored him, and that becomes the main driving impetus for the rest of the book, his revenge on those who did not rescue him and the crew of the Vorga. Now Gully goes back to Earth, and he tries to find the people responsible for his predicament, and this kind of leads to a number of set pieces, dramatic set pieces where he attacks spaceship bases or people and industries. This book has been mentioned as like a proto-cyberpunk book, and I can see that, especially in the later parts. But in the early parts, we do have a description of mega corporations more powerful than governments. The main one in the book called Pristine, with this kind of weird hierarchy. The type of super corporations ruling the world type thing was probably very prescient to be writing about in 1956, but probably also a very real fear then. I remember Eisenhower's warning about the military-industrial complex are probably very fresh on people's minds. And that does make the book seem very modern, a kind of idea on media and corporations, that type of thing. Foyle fails in his efforts and gets captured, and he is sent to a jaunt-proof prison in the bowels of the earth in southern France, the name of which eludes me right now, and I probably couldn't pronounce properly anyway. And there basically is cabins where you're kept in total darkness, and the guards have to wear infrared goggles to run things. And he meets a woman called Jezebel, who basically gives him inspiration to escape, and they escape together, which is something no one else has ever done. And there we go. Now the book kind of transitions to a new phase after that, where we find there's a new socialite in town, a kind of dandy prince called 4 Mile of Ceres, the moon, and he goes around in something called the 4 Mile Circus, kind of this crazy train of followers and hangers-on which kind of travel the world and mess around. And it turns out, of course, 4 Mile of Ceres is actually Gully Foyle in disguise, and he has become like a learned man. Now, the thing about Gully Foyle in the earlier parts of the book, he's kind of a monosyllabic thug with very little thoughts of his own, but once he gets this impetus to get revenge on the Vorga crew for abandoning him, he kind of takes efforts to develop himself, and with the help of Jezebel and other people in the later part of the book, he becomes a kind of learned man who's got very complex plans for his revenge on the Vorga crew. Maybe I'm not describing this too well, you have to read the book to find out. And of course, things get a little complicated. There are intelligence agencies, the inner planets and outer planets are at war with each other, which is kind of reminiscent of what we would later see in books like series like The Expanse in more recent times. A lot of this is apparently as a result of the jaunting thing. Apparently a lot of economies collapsed that relied on transport and all that type of thing. And as the story goes on, the war between the inner and outer planets become more and more a prominent part in the story. There are nuclear attacks, and intelligence agencies of either side are trying to get hold of Gully Foyle, because in that ship that he was abandoned in, there was also a secret substance called Pyre E, which apparently could turn the tide of any war. We find out what it is later. It's if you want me to spoil it, I'll do it right now. Okay, it's basically a massive, all-consuming explosive, but has to be triggered by telepathy, a certain thought pattern. And this is very dangerous, obviously. And as Gully Foyle discovers the truth about it, he takes action to use it on his side. Gully also falls in love with various women, and he also treats some other women in very brutal and ways that we probably wouldn't have in books today, including things like rape and physical abuse. So that's the kind of 1950s or whatever type of anger which still lingers in this book, which is kind of distasteful. Gully himself, it's hard to find any kind of sympathy for. Yes, he is wronged and abandoned, and these evil corporations and governments are treating him like crap, but he's very unsympathetic. I'm not sure how far we're supposed to cheer for him. He's kind of like more of a symbol of individual action against the man or whatever, more than a sympathetic character that you want to cheer for. And anyway, things develop, and Gully turns out to be a very special individual with a very special skill related to something that I said earlier about jaunting. and things get a little cosmic towards the end where he's appearing through space and time. And anyway, there's a big ending, and I won't ruin all the story. It's very interesting. Like I said, it is often very prescient. It's often before its time. Some of its attitudes. There are things like cybernetic enhancements, which we don't really see again later until the 70s and 80s. Just the attitudes of some of the characters are very sarcastic and so on, which you don't really equate with a lot of stuff from the 70 years ago. Well, I don't anyway. So I enjoyed the book. It is probably better read in one or two sittings. I read it over a couple of months really, in small segments, but the prose is very reminiscent of some of the latest cyberpunk type thing. There's a lot of descriptive, fast-paced type of thing. There are like set pieces which kind of deserve to be read all in one go. And yeah, so that is pretty much my thoughts on The Stars My Destination. It is worth a read just to see what people could have thought about in the 1950s and how prescient and how prophetic they were about our modern world. And that basically, that also says how little human condition has changed, that these things were seen as possible back then and we've let them occur. As a story of a man against the will of the powers that be, it's very impressive, although the unsympathetic main character was the thing that kind of soured it for me. I didn't really want to cheer for a guy who would punch women, knock them out, or rape them, or what have you. Even if he was wronged and he became like the most important person in the universe, it kind of didn't sit well with me. I didn't really like Gully in the first part of the book when he was kind of like this unthinking thug. Of course, that's probably what the author was wanting you to feel. So anyway, it's worth a read. If you're a science fiction fan and you haven't read this book, probably one to tick off the to be read pile list, just to say you've read it. That's kind of what happened with me. I actually have a paper copy of this in storage, and I never got around to reading it for years, so an ebook had to do in the end. So anyway, that is The Stars My Destination, also originally published as Tiger Tiger. It was originally serialized in a magazine, I believe, and then published as Tiger Tiger in the UK, then got a publication in the US as The Stars My Destination. So that is The Stars My Destination by Alfred from 1956. Okay, so that's the blabbering done, and I hope you are still watching. It is the 10th of May here. It's a Saturday morning here in Christchurch. Sunny, a little chilly, and I'm hoping to do something more with my day after I finish doing this filming, besides editing and uploading. Things are going okay here for now. Things have changed, things are going better, and I just wanted to pass it on. So we'll catch you next time. Next video will probably be a book haul in the later weeks of May. I'm buying books again, so we'll have plenty to talk about then. Until then, have a good day, have a good weekend, have a good week, have a good evening, have a good morning, whatever time you're watching this in. We'll catch you next time.